So all we've really done is answered one small part of this question as to why a teenager might start taking drugs. It's probably an important part in terms of the neurobiology of why people do that, but it's certainly just one part.
Experimenting is a normal part of growing up.
This is not like an idea.
But social media, for all its ability to spread good and bad ideas, may be presenting new challenges to the world's 1.8 billion adolescents.
What you're seeing is that some of this starts out as normal teen experimentation and impulsivity and bad decisions. And then there's a contagion effect where kids will say, oh, that seems like a good idea, that seems funny, people were getting noticed for that, so I'm going to try that, or I'm going to try to one-up it.
Child development experts increasingly agree that teaching kids to delay gratification, instilling self-control, may be the key to navigating those stormy teenage years and life in general. With Everyday Health, I'm Stephanie Selling.
Okay, so just take 2 minutes, talk to the person next to you. What questions did that raise for you? What were the sort of takeaways from that very short and quite dramatic media sort of frenzy of kids, teenagers, and drugs and alcohol? What did you notice about that? Just have 2 minutes to talk to the person next to you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Okay, would anybody like to start us off? What questions did that little short video clip raise for you, or what takeaways were? Yeah.
I think one thing that really resonated with me is that you role model the right behavior. That is very important because if you are doing it and you're asking somebody else to do it, the first question they turn around and say, then why are you doing it? I have the same experience with my digital.
Right.
So that's one thing. And the second thing I think is towards the end, I just feel that, these complex cases, if the children are exposed to these cases where people have gone astray, I don't know, maybe they will react differently, maybe if they analyze it as homework.
Yeah, good point. I mean, the first point was about your role as a parent, as a role model. And we can't really stress that one enough. You know, you're one of the key influences, along with us as well. But kids only spend on average 17% of time with their teachers, and that's in elementary school when they're with the same teachers. So with high school teachers, it's far less. So your role is absolutely crucial. Thank you. Anything else?
Just a clarification thing, guys. We do it to kids when they're very young.
Yeah, we do.
And we don't know that it has far-reaching repercussions, right?
Sure. I mean, it's linked to you've heard of the marshmallow test? So this was done in the 60s, I think, at Stanford University, where kids were brought in one at a time and sat at the table, and there was a marshmallow there. They were told they've got two choices. They can eat the marshmallow as soon as the researcher's gone out of the room, or they can wait, and then eventually they'll get two. So they found they did. I know which I would have gone for. But anyway, what happened was they studied the kids who just gobbled the first marshmallow and the ones who were able to delay the gratification and wait, have resilience and go for the second one. And what they found was when they studied these people through life, the ones who were able to resist actually had better relationships, higher earnings, less unemployment, less involvement with crime. And of course there are always outliers, you know. I think I would have been the outlier. I would have eaten that and still eaten it. But that delayed gratification, and especially nowadays gratification, can come at the flick of a switch. You know, when even for ourselves now we don't save up for things as much. And kids don't, you know, they just seem to get things really quickly. So that's a really good point. Yeah.
I thought it was a little stereotypical, but it's teenage boys.
It was very stereotypical, and that's why I'm a little bit wary of that, because it was very dramatic, and teenagers are on a tear, you know. Well, what's new, really? And it was.
Participating more.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm pleased Mr. Bell's in the room, because I've never been in a room with as little testosterone as this one. It's totally overpowered, so don't go anywhere, Mr. Bell. Yeah.
So far away from our kids, but you always read how they were coming from their homes, they were big kids. The parents were really surprised where was it coming from, and so people so far,
Absolutely, and I mean, if we look at our kids here, what makes the school quite almost unique is I've been here nearly 3 years now. I don't think I've had to raise my voice to a student at all, elementary, middle, or high. If somebody's doing something wrong, you make the eye contact, and that's all it takes. So these are great kids, but we know some of our kids are involved in some of this stuff as well. So, yeah.
But also great kids can make very stupid decisions.
Absolutely.
And so I think that we're really naive if we expect that our children will not see everything that was on that screen.
Yeah.
Probably every child of a parent in here already knows that stuff.
Yeah, and what's interesting now, as they said on that, social media means it's much easier to share. So let's explore why that's our brains all tend to look the same. The structure of them is the same, they've all got the same parts, but actually they're all different. Even if you look at identical twins, their brains might look the same, but they're different. A bit like these houses, they might all look the same, but we furnish them differently inside. And we furnish them differently because of our tastes and because of our experience. So the human brain, and you know, we're talking about children's brains, they're made up, really there's two main factors. One is the genetics and one is experience. So that's why, as we say, the two identical twins, they might have the same genes, but they experience different things. Even if, and I talked to one of our teachers who has identical twins, you know, you take them to the same movies, you read the same book to them, but the way they interpret and experience that is different. So our brains change. And what we've seen with drugs and certain types of drugs and alcohol, it actually changes the physical shape and size of certain parts of the brain. But we're all unique. Parental advice tends to come in different shapes and forms. And here's just some examples. Pointing out the law, it's illegal to drink at your age, tends to be a common thing that parents will say. Drugs can mess with your brain, so we're not neuroscientists, but we know it does something, but we're not quite sure what. Just Say No, this was in the UK when I grew up, this was a very famous campaign, Just Say No, there was a song about it, I still remember it. Look What Happened To, and then insert the name of the celebrity at the time. We were, like, sadly, Whitney Houston's family seemed to have this sort of trait as well. But we feel if we can connect it with real life people that they know, then it helps. When I was your age, I didn't do this, I did do this, and so on and so on. But this is a different era. Kids learn differently now, they're motivated in different ways, and we need to accept that. And it's much easier to get access to certain things. One of the things, this is apart from the drugs and alcohol part, we're seeing huge problems worldwide with pornography addiction. And we've almost been able to trace this to a very specific moment in time. And it wasn't the internet, it was high-speed broadband. Because before then, if you wanted to download an image, it would, you all sort of remember that, it would take ages. Videos, you almost didn't bother. But now, multiple images can be downloaded into kids' bedrooms instantly. Videos, no problem at all. So that moment has coincided with a real escalation in addiction to pornography. So that's some of the parental advice. You might also be of this persuasion. Oh, well, all kids drink, No, they don't. Or it might be, it's just good preparation for college. And again, no, it isn't. We shouldn't have to put kids through bad stuff now to prepare them for bad stuff later. That's not what it's about. But the overall point about parental advice is why do we do that? It's because we love our kids, because we care about them. Now, when I spoke to high school kids earlier on in the year, although I love and care about them, that's not the perspective we came from. It was, here's the science behind it. This is physically what will happen. And if you're going to do this stuff, you should be aware that these are some of the risks, okay? Not because we love you and caring, because that's your job, okay? So we're going to look at this much more from a scientific point of view. And as I said, I'm not a scientist at all, but there is enough research out there to be able to confidently share what we know at the moment. So why do people, not just young people, take drugs and alcohol? It tends to be one or more of these different factors. Curiosity, I wonder what would happen if. And now that's probably less of a factor than before, because as we saw with social media and the internet, we sort of know what's going to happen, And it's not going to be fireworks and magic's going to happen, we know, we can read up about it. Peer pressure is huge. The desire, the need to fit in socially drives a lot of what motivates children. Rebellion. Why do I do it? Because I can't. Teenagers often respond to, what they're allowed to do by doing things that they're not allowed to do. So because I can't, availability, because I can, because it's here. And again, in Bangkok, we're in quite a unique situation here, where things are available in places where maybe in different parts of the world they might not be available. So availability. To escape tends to be not totally, but more to do with kids who are in challenging circumstances, whether that be challenging family homes or schools. But we shouldn't discount it from our own kids as well. It's still a factor. Enjoyment. One of the things that we know about some of these drugs is they actually give us a pleasurable feeling. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But it gives us a pleasurable feeling without having to earn the pleasure. When we solve a particularly different, it might be a crossword puzzle, or we win a race, or we manage some difficult situation, we get that buzz. we can get that buzz through drugs without actually having to go through the hard stuff. So, the environment, as I said, depending on where we are located, the environment can be conducive to getting your hands on these things, or it can be more difficult. Even the family home, if you have a lot of prescription drugs, a lot of alcohol readily available, that's different from having a house without. It's for time immemorial, it's been perceived as cool. You remember the sort of cigarette smoking in the 60s and 50s and 70s? You look at James Dean, the epitome of cool. You hardly ever saw a photograph of James Dean without a cigarette in his mouth. So these are the new cigarettes. It's perceived as being cool. And last of all, addiction. Because why do I take it? Because I have to. And we never want kids, or adults for that matter, to be in the situation where we have no other option. We need to do that. And we'll talk a bit about that in a moment as well. So a little bit about our own data. Now this is going to be very small, so I might have to read it on the screen here. We surveyed 300 of our high school kids, and what we asked them was, now the first one's a very interesting question, I'll explain why. From your own experience, what percentage of ISB students from your grade drink alcohol on a regular basis? So we didn't ask them, do you drink alcohol on a regular basis? What we wanted was a different angle. It was perceptions, what kids think. And perceptions aren't always accurate, they're rarely accurate. But we just wanted to know what they felt there. So what we saw was, we'll just read it easier about between 61 and 80% of students thought that 16% of high school kids drank alcohol on a regular basis. 41 to 60% of our students thought that 30% drank on a regular basis. But the bottom one is probably more interesting. How often do you drink alcohol at the weekend? And you'll see another one to follow this slide. Never, 66%, occasionally or frequently, 27% occasionally, 5% frequently. So 32% of our students said they drank at the weekends, occasionally or frequently. That's a third. I think that's pretty significant. But then when you look at this one here, do you drink during the week? We had almost 70% never, and 6% occasionally, 2% frequently. So if we believe our students, this looks to be much more of a weekend thing, and I think it probably is. I've got a lot more data, but I think this was the interesting one, because we were interested to know, when is this happening? Is it happening? When is it happening? So,
Was it an anonymous?
yes, it was completely anonymous.
High school?
Yes, only high school. But kids still believe that whether we say it or not, it's not really anonymous. We can still find out. But it genuinely was. Yeah, absolutely. So we're never sure that the data we get is accurate, but what we're looking for is big picture patterns. So we can't say this percentage do this percentage do that, but we can say that we definitely have an issue at weekends. It's less of an issue during the week. Yeah.
You asked if the 33%, how many of you know that if they didn't know?
No, we didn't go there. What we actually did, we did a... Yeah. Did we ask the kids how many of the 33% actually, how many of your parents know that you drink? Yeah. So what we did, we had a presentation with high school kids. Now we missed a chunk of them because it was an IASIS weekend coming up, which is why we could get them all in the theatre for 45 minutes. Normally it's only it's a 5-minute talk during an assembly if we get them all together. But we got 300. In fact, no, we got 500, but we got 300 responses. We asked them to bring their smartphones into the assembly and their laptops. And while I was talking, they were actually, this is Mr. Bell's genius, they were doing the survey and we were looking at real-time data. And they were also posting questions as well on a was it back channel?
A back channel,
Back channel.
absolutely.
And when those questions came up, I was actually flying out to somewhere that evening. In the airport, I was answering the kids' questions, and they were all anonymous as well. Yes?
Did you also ask the student whether the parent also will leave regularly?
No, we didn't go there. No. So we were quite specific in what we wanted to know, because it was also about drugs, and I'll show you a few more in a few more slides in a second. So do you know what this is? See what it is. Yeah, it's an aircraft engine, okay? So the purposes of an aircraft engine are twofold. One is to propel us very quickly from A to B, but the other one is actually to keep us alive, yeah? I have a very good friend who flies for Cathay Pacific, and he flies 747-400s. I said, why do you fly those ones in particular? He said, because they've got 4 engines. If they made them with 6 engines, I'd fly those ones. So the purpose of these is to keep us alive once we're in the air. And it's a little bit like our brain. The main purpose of the brain is not to learn. That's the secondary purpose. The main purpose is to keep us alive. So we asked the kids, how many of you would knowingly put foreign objects into an aeroplane engine and then get on the plane and fly? And that's okay if you're an aeronautical engineer and you know what would happen. Same thing. How many of us would knowingly put stuff into our brain, because that's where all these substances go eventually. How many of us would put stuff into our brain, the organ that is there to keep us alive, and then go out and expect everything to be normal? And it's the same thing, because we can do untold short-term and long-term and terminal damage to ourselves by putting things into our bloodstream, which eventually goes to our brain. And that was, I think that was a little bit of a, you know, a little eye-opener for them. However, we must never expect pieces of information like that for all kids who are teenagers to say, oh, right, I get it now. That's not how it works, as you know. So let's look specifically at alcohol for a start. Okay? We've been creating and imbibing alcohol for literally thousands of years. And I mean, there's a bit of seriousness to this as well. The ancient Egyptians used to give, it wasn't wine, it was more beer to the people who were building the pyramids. I don't think they quite went that far. But this is something that's not new, of course. It's been around for a long, long time. But some statistics. Alcohol affects the teenage brain in different ways to the adult brain. Main reason being that the teenage brain is a work in progress. And it's a work in progress that starts at the back. So the first part of the brain to develop in the womb is actually here, and it ends with the prefrontal cortex here, around the age roughly 25. Okay? So we're lucky, we all have perfectly developed, fully formed brains, and some of ours might actually be on the down slope now. But kids, it's aged roughly between 22 and 25 before that part of the brain is fully developed. And the thing about that is the prefrontal cortex is the executive function center of the brain, so it's the decision making, the planning, the risk assessment part of the brain. Now, we already know that teenagers are predisposed to taking more risks, and this part of the brain that manages risk isn't fully developed. When we add alcohol into that part of the brain, which is where it goes, then it becomes even less effective. So kids who are not good decision makers anyway become less good decision makers. The other thing is that as the brain is developing, it's impacted by foreign substances such as drugs and alcohol, and it needs not to be, it needs nurturing. What we've seen in very early birth, so children who are born 1-2 months early, we have to be very careful with brain development, because what their brain is expecting is dark, warmth, and not a lot of stimulation in the womb. But all of a sudden they're exposed to light, sound, activity, all those sort of things. So the brain's a really sensitive organ. That's why it's sort of encased in a hard area. Okay? So our teenage brains are developing pretty rapidly, but also they're suspect to any differences, any changes that are going to them. Here's some statistics. Men are more likely to drink heavily than women, but women become addicted at lower levels and shorter duration. So all of this data that I share with you is from multiple sources. It's not just one study that's done, it's from multiple studies, otherwise I wouldn't share it. So when we talk about the hangover, what actually happens is the hormone that tells our kidneys to absorb the water, reabsorb the water, which is ADH is the name of the hormone. The alcohol blocks that, so the water isn't actually reabsorbed. So we basically dehydrate. That's what a hangover is, it's dehydration. And continuing with this sort of pattern, you know, day after day or week after week, can result in permanent damage to the kidneys. Alcohol affects the cerebellum. This is the part of the back of the brain here. So we've done some lovely sessions with kids when we've had them sort of do little balances and saying the part of your brain that's working really hard is to do with your motor skills, the cerebellum here, but that is impacted by alcohol as well. So it doesn't work as well, which is why we wobble. And of course our speech is affected by that as well. But here's the link to the first one. The damage alcohol does to brains that are still developing can, as I said, be dangerous in the short term, but can actually lead to permanent damage. So we'll look at what some of that damage might look like. I told you it wasn't going to be lots of fun, didn't it? So young people who start using alcohol regularly before 18 are more likely to, not they will, but are statistically more likely to be involved in violent behaviors, attempt suicide, endure significant relationship problems. That's romantic relationships and family relationships as well. Develop alcohol problems in later life, and we'll pull that one apart a little bit in a moment as well. People who have their first drinks at age 14 or younger are 6 times more likely to develop alcohol problems than those who don't until they're 21. Now, all of the alcohol thing, we look at alcohol and think, well, you know, how much harm can it do? What I'm trying to do today is to show you what harm it can do, okay? Not that it definitely will, but these are some of the risks that we take. Yeah?
The people who have their first drinks at age 14.
Yeah.
My question is, what is your definition of having
Very
a
good,
first drink?
very good
Because,
question.
For
Yeah.
example, we're having dinner, my
Yeah.
husband and I are having a glass of wine, and my
Yes.
daughter, who is 16, would say, can I have a sip?
Yeah.
And I don't want to be, I don't want to cause that kind of,
No.
no, you can't do that. Yeah, sure, you can have a sip, but that's it.
Sure.
And does that
No.
count as having a first drink?
Thank you for raising that. It's a really important point. No, it doesn't. When we're talking about those who drink, have their first drinks, we're talking about sort of 3 or 4 drinks at the weekend, you know, 3 or 4 beers or shorts and things like that. And we're talking about not just once, although, funnily enough, some of the most recent research shows much less than we thought can have a long-term impact. But a little sip of wine like that, no, that's a good point, thank you. 90% of addictions start in the teen years. And when we talk about addiction, there are some other factors to take into account. Some of us have a genetic predisposition to being addicted. And what we think at the moment is it's between 40 and 60%, probably nearer 50%, that's already preordained. But that doesn't mean, you know, if you have that gene that makes you more liable to addiction, that you're going to be addicted. Absolutely not. There's so many other factors, you know, in terms of, we talk about parenting, environment, and peers and so on that can influence as well. So if we're still saying, well, so what, you know, we all drink alcohol, the kids, it's not doing them that much harm. Just a last few pieces of data. This is a very commonly sourced piece of data from The Lancet. The Lancet is the medical journal of the UK, and it shows the harm caused to self and also to others by different types of drugs. So if you look at things like cannabis, for example, then on a scale of 0 to 100, with the maximum harm rating being 100, cannabis has probably 8 to self, and then up to 20, just over for others. Look at alcohol. And obviously included in that, we're talking about deaths and injuries due to drink driving, which is an enormous issue with teenagers, certainly in the Western world. But heroin, crack cocaine, they all make us sort of shrink in terror, and yet look at what the statistics tell us about alcohol. So it's a serious matter. 2.5 million people die of alcohol-related deaths every year. 2.5 million. 4% of all deaths worldwide are alcohol-related. And when we look at the age range from 15 to 29, that's almost 10%. A tenth. So these are pretty in-your-face statistics. And they're, as I say, supported by numerous types of research. This is what it is, okay? So we can't anymore say, oh, alcohol, it's not as bad as those other things. It's actually the causes of what happens when alcohol is drunk by teenagers can be really significant. Let's look a little bit, there is some good news later, so don't worry. We'll move on to substances other than alcohol, because we're looking at what they actually physically do, first of all. A little bit of neuroscience, just 2 slides that we need to understand the full impact. Okay, the brain's fuel, how does it keep going? It survives on glucose and oxygen. Those are the 2 components that fuel the brain to keep it going and therefore to keep us alive. We get the glucose and oxygen through the blood, okay? So that's fact number 1, that's our brain's fuel. We can keep going. If our heart stops, we can be kept alive. We can't be kept alive when the brain dies. The second bit of neuroscience is what happens when we learn. So in our brain, we have roughly 100 billion neurons. And most of those neurons are present when a baby is born. The growth is tremendous early on after conception, and then in the first few years of life. So there's all sorts of things going on. We used to think until fairly recently that it was impossible for new neurons to grow. We grow new skin cells every day, we grow other cells in the body every day. We thought that neurons were the ones that didn't grow. Now we know that's not true. The neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, happens when we're asleep, but not many grow. Some die, not many neurons grow. But what happens when we learn? We get messages from this neuron cell body here, which travel down the axon here. And the axon in mature brains is surrounded by like a fatty substance called myelin. And the myelin helps insulate the axon from outside bodies and infection, but it also helps that movement go much quicker. So a myelinated neuron is more efficient than a non-myelinated. When the message gets to the axon endings here, you'll notice that we have a gap. Okay? No neurons are actually connected to each other. And this gap is called the synapse. And for us to learn something new, that message must move across the gap from one neuron to another. And it's really tricky, it's hard. That's why learning something new is really hard at first. And then the more times we do it, the more we practice, then the easier it becomes, okay? But when we're talking about the impact of drugs, this is where the impact happens, in the synapse here. Because the messages are carried across from one neuron to another by things called neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters are small chemicals. We've identified just over 50 of them so far, but we have some that you will have heard of, like dopamine, serotonin, and so on. What happens in that tiny little gap, and this is what the gap looks like. So this is an axon ending, this is the dendrite of another neuron. This gap here, this is where the drugs actually have their impact. So drugs entering our bloodstream change the way the brain operates in two ways. Either they copy neurotransmitters, they pretend to be neurotransmitters because their chemical composition looks very similar and it tricks the brain into thinking it's a neurotransmitter and there's some learning going on here. Or it will overstimulate the brain's reward circuit. So we'll come on to that one in a moment. But let's have a look at the first one. They imitate neurotransmitters. So as well as dopamine, serotonin, anandamide is a neurotransmitter involved in the learning process, and this is its chemical composition here. This one here is THC, which is the active ingredient in the drug cannabis. And you can see the similarities. So what happens when we introduce cannabis into our bodies, it will go via the blood to the brain, and we get a situation where our neurons are tricked. And the reason I've got so much text is I can copy these for you and you can take it away so you can use it right now. So our neurons are tricked into sending messages, assuming that we're dealing with a normal neurotransmitter when we're not. And what happens is we get this high because we're experiencing something without having gone through a big challenge or a difficulty. We're experiencing a real rush and a high. So by copying neurotransmitters, this is one way our brains are actually affected by the introduction of drugs. The other one is, I mentioned these two before, and it says technically the only two things you'll enjoy, serotonin and dopamine. Dopamine is the brain's pleasure chemical, so we get dopamine when we eat our favorite food, we get a surge of dopamine. When we solve difficult problems, as I say, or win a race, and there are some other things we'll not go into today that also do with dopamine. Serotonin is more to do with enhancing mood, but they do a similar sort of thing. So what drugs do, they actually activate the reward pathway without us having to do much. So cocaine is an example. When we introduce cocaine into the body, it gives us the feeling that we've done something really praiseworthy and we feel fantastic, but we haven't actually done anything. But the next time we imbibe or inject cocaine, we have to do a little bit more because the brain's getting used to it. And then a bit more, and then a bit more, and you can see where this is all going. This was another piece of data we got from our student survey. So we asked them, what sort of drugs have you witnessed being taken? Not, again, what have you taken? We felt we would get a bit more of an accurate result if we asked that question rather than what have you yourself taken? The LSD acid was a real surprise. That wasn't on the radar at all. Cannabis wasn't much of a surprise. The shisha, we've seen it. Laughing gas or nitrous oxide, we've heard this as well. And 9% prescription drugs of various different kinds, but there's one of those that predominates at the moment. So we've done quite a lot of talking to students, we've done talking to other people in the community as well, and what we find is this bit here is not corroborated. We can't find evidence for that, but we can find evidence for all the other things. Okay? Now, don't misinterpret that. Don't misinterpret that 33% of our kids take cannabis. No. It's all it is what sort of drugs have you witnessed being taken? Okay? So this is what. This is from a student survey. Yeah. Yes.
What is cannabis? Sorry, what is that?
Cannabis. So it's you know the chemical we saw before. So it tends to be things that people smoke, like a cigarette. Yeah. Acid is a different type of drug that brings about hallucinations. It was actually, acid was popular more in the 60s and 70s. Some people think that if you take acid, then it makes you more creative, you think outside the box and so on, but it has obviously clear risks attached to it. Yeah?
It doesn't say about 30% of ISD kids taking cannabis. What do you think 30% represent? The society or media?
No, what this is when we asked our kids, so we asked 300 high school kids, what sort of drugs have you seen being taken? And out of that, this proportion here, that's the kids who said, we've seen this being taken. So technically, it could be one kid. It's not, but it could be one kid. But 33% of students have seen that drug. So this is what sort of drugs are. It's not to do with people, it's to do what's out there in the community. Okay? Out there, no, not in the school community, in the Bangkok community. Yeah, yeah. Yes? Yeah. Okay, I'll come to that right now. I'll show you right now. We can do some more questions later, okay?
Can I ask, were you clear about, is that at ISD or in general? I mean, I could
In
be
general.
on TV or at home in the States if they're at home?
No. So it was
It wasn't specific about our community here at ISD?
not at ISP. No, it was in Bangkok, Nichida. So and we had more questions relating to downtown, uptown as well. Yeah. Okay, so let me move on. So let's look at one or two of these individually. This one I think is perceived as probably the least dangerous, nitrous oxide lacquer. It comes in, canisters like aerosol, like whipped cream, but when it's bought, like downtown, it would be in balloons, normally in balloons. So kids will buy balloons, and a bit like, when you get a helium balloon, and you inhale and you have this squeaky voice, that's the sort of form it comes in. It's widely available in Bangkok, but here's what happens. So, do you remember when we talked about, when we saw the fuel gauge, we said the brain's fuel is oxygen and glucose, okay? So, when we inhale nitrous oxide, it can bring on hypoxia, which is a lowered oxygen content in the blood. So basically, one of the brain's key fuel elements is going down and down and down. What makes that alarming is, I'll give you an example. So in a couple of states in the US, who still have the death penalty, one of the options they were looking at is getting rid of the lethal injection and using hypoxia. And the reason they were looking at that is hypoxia is relatively painless, and it can actually be the opposite. It can give you a little bit of a nice, serene, calm feeling, and it creeps up. So if you sort of take that into this situation that we have here, then kids really, when they're taking that, they don't know. There's no alarm bells, it doesn't hurt or anything like that. So it's perceived, I know, by kids and by many adults as harmless. And in terms of statistics, it's not one of the worst, for sure. But again, what we're about is being aware of what the potential might be. Long-term results, and kids tend not to take this long-term, but if they did, then we see depletion in vitamin B12. And B12 is what makes our DNA and makes our healthy red blood cells. And it can lead to permanent brain and nerve damage. So it's not harmless. And hypoxia, this lowering of the oxygen content in the brain, can result in permanent brain damage. So even though this one has the reputation of, almost like alcohol, a little bit harmless, we should be aware these are some of the potential factors. We were talking about prescription drugs. This is probably the big one that we're picking up on at the moment, and it's Xanax. And Xanax is an antidepressant. And how it works, it addresses the neurons in the part of the brain that deal with stress and anxiety, and it suppresses them. So those neurons don't fire. So it's actually a very effective antidepressant. The problem, and there's always a problem, is that the brain will adjust to this. So it will automatically produce more of those, of firing of those neurons that fire and anxiety. Anxiety is actually good for us. Stress is good for us. It's normal. But what we find when we take these sort of drugs is when we come off them, then the brain is overactive, it compensates and it overcompensates. So it leads to high blood pressure, shaking, intense anxiety. In very rare cases, and I will stress that, it can result in death. But when you take medicines of any type now, you read on the side, possible side effects, you would never take the drug, would you? The side effects are horrendous. But we do not want our kids taking Xanax. What makes it 1,000 times worse is when they combine it with alcohol. And this is deadly. This is really, really serious. And we have come across 1 or 2 cases at school of kids combining these two. Give you an example. In Australia, in 1987, 3 deaths as a result of Xanax and alcohol. 2012, 86 deaths, an estimated 250 this year. That was last year, that was 2014.
Why do kids take Xanax and alcohol? Is it better high?
Yeah, it can give them a better high, yeah, and it's because it's the environment they're in. Where there's alcohol, there's often Xanax or vice versa, and they know it. The problem is, both of these are what we call multipliers. So the Xanax multiplies the effect of the alcohol, and the alcohol multiplies the effect of Xanax. But the problem there is it's so difficult to judge. Have a look. So what they do is suppress our brain and the central nervous system as well. But it's very difficult to estimate the impact. So that's the classic aeroplane engine analogy, is they have no idea what the impact is going to be. And it's very, very dangerous. More impact, less certainty. Sure. So here's what can happen. Brain, kidneys, liver can all shut down, and damage can often be irreparable. It is, I can't stress enough, it's so much more dangerous than alcohol on its own or Xanax on its own. It's not like adding 1 and 1 and getting 2. Okay? Yeah. It's more easily available than it should be. Yeah. Well, that's a good question. So I checked up on this, and it used to be available in Thailand without prescription. Now, technically, it should have a prescription, but there are still places that will sell it without a prescription. I think this is possibly one of the most serious things. We call them gateway drugs, and alcohol is a gateway drug. Tobacco is a gateway drug. Cannabis is a gateway drug. Or, it's low level. It's not going to do me too much harm. Everybody does it. It's a phase we go through, then it'll be fine. But again, not true. Let's have a look at what the data says. So from 12 to 17-year-olds who use gateway drugs like tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana, they're up to 266 times more likely to use cocaine than kids who don't use any gateway drugs. And all of this data is from the Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse in Columbia. So again, it's pretty authentic. Adults who drank as children, and again, that's back to your very good question about what do we mean? Does that mean 1 glass of wine with my family? I didn't know, but that's something more sustained. Adults who drank as children are 6 times more likely to be regular cocaine users because we've activated those addiction mechanisms. Children who drink are 50 times more likely to use cocaine than non-drinkers. 90% of children who use marijuana actually smoked cigarettes or drank first earlier on in their life. So there are some very clear links here. This last one is actually not from the Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse. This is from BBC News last week. Cannabis is now responsible for 1 in 4 cases of psychosis in the UK. And part of the reason is that we're dealing with a different type of cannabis, a skunk, which is much stronger. We're seeing this in Australia as well, and I'm sure we'll be seeing it globally. Cannabis is becoming stronger as people, seek to get those more exaggerated effects. Yeah.
I think the same that is becoming legal.
mean, you know, you've got the medicinal use, of course, as well. But I think as long as people go into this with their eyes open, you know, you can deny that, but you'd be wrong because the data is there. Okay. It's just about, and this is the same as we did with the kids. This is, if you want to take cannabis, you know, ultimately, you can get your hands on it. If you want to do it, you'll do it. But go in with your eyes open that these are some of the risks. And you need to be aware of that. So, looking further down the line, what happens is as we continue using drugs, the brain responds to all that extra dopamine by producing less because it doesn't need it. It only needs a certain amount in the brain. So less and less and less, which means that you need to put more and more drugs in, and that's what we call the road to addiction. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. And once you're addicted to anything, it's really difficult to wean yourself off it. I like this quote. Just take a second to have a read. And that's from a lady called Nicola Morgan, who's written a book called Blame My Brain, The Amazing Teenage Brain Revealed. It's one of the best and easiest to read, and you can actually read it with your kids as well. It's written in child-speak language as well. Anybody middle school upwards could read it. I've brought along quite a few copies. I'm not married to Nicola Morgan, by the way. So if you want to sign one of those out, all you need to do is, on the back here, there's a barcode with a number. You just write alongside, you've got the numbers written here, just write your name and your mobile number along there, and you can take this out as long as you need to. Nicola Morgan, and it's the amazing, and it's called Blame My Brain. And I've been emailing with Nicola Morgan, and I've mentioned to Charlotte before, she'd be happy to come out and talk to us as well. So what can we do about it? Because it's really hard. And if you search on the internet, there's not a lot of answers out there. But here's some interesting information. According to what type of parenting you have, and I know nobody falls into one category or the other, it's always a mixture. But what we find is teens with authoritarian parents who are very strict and will be on your case, the helicopter parent, looking at the kids' drawers under the bed and so on and so forth. Those kids tend to consume the most dangerously high levels of alcohol. Why? Because they can't, so they do. Overprotective parents present themselves as allies, so this is where you're not a big brother or a big sister, you're a mum or a dad, you're a parent, and you make some key decisions for your kids. Passive parents believe teens should be independent before they have the tools to cope with independence. These children can feel that parents don't love or care for them and can feel neglected, leading to resentment. These are the parents who will say, oh well, all kids drink and it's good preparation for college and so on. Those kids have the second highest levels of alcohol consumption. But positive parents are the ones who set clear expectations, explain reasons, encourage teens to talk, set and enforce consequences, build trust and teach skills. This is why we were just saying before, I don't know what jobs you do, but being a parent is the hardest job you'll ever have. But it's the most rewarding job as well. So it sounds easy when you write it out like that, but there are certain parenting styles that are not conducive to good relationships, and we're almost done, and then we'll do some questions. So let's have another look. When you mentioned the role model thing, James Baldwin, a novelist, said, children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them. And that's, the brain is wired to copy. It's wired for a lot of things, but one of the things it's wired to do is to mimic. So if, you know, you're in the house drinking every night, you know, maybe that's your way of winding down after a tough day, but if it's large quantities, it's going to probably have an impact. You know, when we talked about what factors affected that, the environment was one, that home environment is crucial. I like the fact that you said that, he's got a cigarette in his hand. So, what are some strategies? And as I say, I apologise in advance. I'd love to be able to tell you, do these 3 things and everything will be fine. It's not as simple as that. Say, we would have known that before. This is the big one, I think, is communicate. Keep those communication channels open. As parents, it's really important that you talk to your kids about these issues, but not in a judgmental way. I've also put down here counsellors, high school faculty, Mr. Roback, Mr. Vaughan. Mr. Roback, because he's, apart from the fact he's a very empathetic type of guy, one of his main roles in high school is, we call it student discipline, but actually, I can't imagine anybody I'd rather go and talk to about an issue I had than him. So he's not the sort of firm, crack the whip type of discipline guy, he's a listener. And unfortunately, we're losing Pete at the end of this year. He's going to be replaced by Andy Vaughan. Andy Vaughan, again, the typical athletic director, big butch job. Andy he's so socially, emotionally aware, and he's a great guy for kids to talk to. You talk to your kids, I'm sure. I know my kids adore those two. But it doesn't have to be them, it doesn't have to be counsellors. It might just be a teacher that they have a particular bond or relationship. But also they're spending more time, not necessarily with you, maybe in the same building as you. I know we have 3 kids and now we think we have 1 kid, because there's only one that sits downstairs with us all the time, and the other 2 are off in their rooms, we sometimes forget. When the oldest one goes to college, we'll have to remind ourselves he's actually not upstairs. Check the bank balance and that will remind us. Read up on it. And teach your kids this as well. There's a lot of literature out there. Just be careful, because especially when it concerns the brain, there's a lot of, we call them neuromyths. I don't know if you remember the thing of playing Mozart to the unborn baby in the womb will make the baby cleverer, and those people made millions. It wasn't a shred of evidence. When they played Mozart, the baby moved. Well, hello, babies move. If you've had one kicking in your tummy, you know it moves. But read up. The more information you can get, the better. And come and ask questions as well. We're not experts in this, but part of our job is to read up about this. Model good behaviours. As the slide before said about imitating, that's really important. You are the key role model in your child's life. Positive parenting, like we saw on the slide before. And know where your kids are. I'm horrified sometimes. I hear of these massive house parties, where we've had alcohol there, we've had drugs there. And I think if I was a parent, A, I'd be cross, but B, I'd look in the mirror at myself and think, why do I not know what's going on? And I know kids will always say, oh, I'm just popping around a friend's house, and then they might go downtown or whatever. And this is not easy, but do your best. And do your best to know what's going on in your own home, for sure. These are some of the most dangerous situations in our own homes here. And the last thing really is, we talked about the prefrontal cortex. It represents almost 1/3 of our human brain. It's a very important part, and it's the reason why we're not sitting in here doing really risky stuff now. And it's the reason why kids often do. So sometimes, I know I talked about not being a helicopter parent, but sometimes we need to be our kids' prefrontal cortex. We need to do some of that little decision making and planning and risk assessment for them. And we shouldn't just be the big brother or the big sister. Sometimes, we need to make those decisions for them. And I'm sure there might be 1 or 2 questions. If you remember at the start, I said I can't promise to answer them all. If I don't know, I'll not tell you. I've got a little notepad and a pen I can try and find out, but also be aware the right answer might not be out there. Yeah?
So we have this quote about alcohol, right? Students are more
Yeah.
We do the same thing for drugs.
Yeah, and Lee Roback is very much onto this. He's doing a lot of research at the moment as well. What we also know is there are places around outside Nichida that are selling alcohol to underage kids, that are also peddling certain types of drugs like cannabis as well. So Pete and our Thai headmistress, Kundusa, they will often get in the car and go around these places and talk to the owners and, lay the law down. And sometimes it has a permanent impact, sometimes it has a temporary impact, and we need to continuously do that process. Yeah, so the school does random drug testing, and it does it through a hair sample, and it is absolutely random, and it's very similar to what a lot of other high schools do as well. When we test those, they're sent off to the States to be tested. They're returned really quickly. It's a very low level, what we find. We get very, very few positive tests. And it will test for drugs that are in the body for, I think it's just over a week. I'm not an expert on that. Well, you're probably best talking to high school admin about that, but it's pretty serious. But what we also do is we're a little bit more lenient on kids who self-report. So if a kid knocks on Mr. Roback's door and said, look, I just want to tell you, I did this at the weekend, then we treat that differently. Yeah.
How do we find out the kid is having drug alcohol?
Say again, sorry?
Signs and symptoms. What are the signs and symptoms in the kids, our children?
It depends on what they take. And often none at all, because they're not doing it right there and then. It's downtown, or it's at somebody else's house, and then when they come back. I mean, the alcohol thing is relatively easy. It's not a breath, and the way they talk, because one of the parts of the brain it impacts is the part linked to speech, so the slurring of the words. But they all impact in different ways. I think better really to know where your kids are. To just give them an occasional phone call. If they say they're around at their friends playing PlayStation, and you ring them and you can hear loud music and all sorts, they're probably not at their friends playing PlayStation. But it's a hard thing not to trust your kids, isn't it? As a parent, every instinct that you have says, I trust my kids. But what we also know is there are definitely 100% for sure, there are some of our high school kids who are doing some of this stuff, for sure. So, we've got to weigh up what's the best way. Yeah.
But I asked you the other day, hair samples, do you all do random urine analysis?
Don't think so, no.
That would do the alcohol. I mean, the hair sample doesn't do alcohol.
No, there's also a hair sample test that does alcohol, but it's very, very expensive, and it's in its very early stages. So we're monitoring that one, and also I think the turnaround time is very long. So Pete and his team and the councillors are in touch with those developers about that one. So it's something that's definitely on our radar.
I have one more question from residents that they found, this is obviously going more towards high schoolers and older.
Sure.
Does ISB have a policy on younger kids, and when you start educating, you had touched on the Just Say No campaigns that were earlier back in the late 80s and the 90s, and I remember growing up having actual drug education back even in our elementary school. Is ISB touching on any of these things?
Yeah, so our councillors, elementary councillors.
Yeah, they have classroom lessons that start in elementary school, they come to some point.
What they want to do?
She starts, third grade is the first time they start learning about drug everyone. My son said he used drugs in the secret coffee. Really starting to figure out what drugs are and really the understanding of what it does to your body. So it starts to show you.
And again, in middle school, we have wellness sessions where it's included in there as well. Yeah. But I mean, we are looking at one of the big areas of the curriculum we're revising is the health curriculum, which includes that sort of stuff as well. Yeah. Yes?
I am just curious. There is an area downtown that inside those.
Yes.
Outside
Road. Yeah.
And this has been
necessarily, but we do know that's one of the areas that there's a lot of the nitrous oxide in balloons available down there. Yeah. So it's easier for us to have relationships with bars and pharmacies and things here than it is downtown. You know, we're very small fish in a big pond down there. But that doesn't stop us, you know, engaging with those people as well. But to be perfectly honest, it doesn't have a big impact down there. It is what it is. It's a big Asian megacity like Manila, you know, like Jakarta, and you'll find it down there as well. You know, I don't think we're going to win by shutting down, you know, those places. It's actually by working with our own kids. It's a bit like safe online presence. You know, we can't shut down those on the website, but we can educate our kids as to what's safe and what's not. Anything? Yeah.
I'm not very school working and I'm trying to follow the information that I heard today. My question is like, as a high school, do you share like dangerous places like on the information? Do you kind of like just be careful in this room, this place, or whatever? I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing it, so do you share that with the times or not?
That I'm not sure, but we can. But we've got to be pretty sure of our facts as well. I think you can take it as read that there are places around Nitchida, the outside of Nitchida, bars and things like that, that will sell alcohol to underage kids. There are actually places in Khao San Road that advertise, we don't check ID, you know? You can buy a fake ID, exactly, yeah. But be very sure that if you look at our high school as a separate entity, it's no different. In fact, it's probably a lot better than most of the comparable high schools. What's the common factor is the availability and the fact that the teenage rate. Those are the two common factors. Wherever you get those two things together, you'll always have the element of alcohol and drugs, because the availability is there and the brain is programmed to take risks and silly ones because it's not fully developed. You're always going to have that. So please don't go out of this room thinking, wow, our high school's got a huge drug problem. It absolutely hasn't. The world has a drug problem. Teenagers have a drug problem. We do our best to manage it as we do here, but we can't do that ourselves as a school. We need your help and support with your own kids. Yeah?
I have this question. For having to celebrate freedom from addiction,
Yeah.
do we have any strategies that we give children, like, advocacy groups or clubs which, are created for support, who doesn't,
Yeah, I think we do in high school. Again, you'd be better off talking to the high school admin. They're probably closer to that. But I know we do have those groups. And we also work with a group called FCD, Freedom from Chemical Dependency. And they are all former drug users who have rehabilitated, and they actually work with schools, taking kids from a very empathetic point of view of, this is how I felt, this is where I went in my life, and now I'm back on track, and so it's quite credible because they've been through that process. Sometimes they look at people like us and think, well, what does he know? He's never taken drugs in his life, so there's always that. But these guys are good. Yeah.
This is more just an announcement, but there's a seminar parents, Mr. Roback is sharing with chemical dependence people a week Friday on the 20th about keeping our children safe and very much. More of those questions. This is 7:30.
Sure, I think thanks, Sean. Thanks. Yeah.
Recently where we had a learner's club middle school,
Middle school. Not specific. I would be astonished if not, because it doesn't just start in 9th grade. I'm sure it's around but to a much lesser extent. Yeah, as I say, it's definitely part of our program, part of our wellness program we deliver at middle school. But I mean, this is an ongoing thing where we're constantly checking it out. Please, you brought up the middle school point, because it's not just a high school issue, and we talk about this on a weekly basis. And as I said, not because we have a problem, but because even if we have one case, as you've seen, the potential for danger is so huge that one kid out of 2,000 kids, one is enough for us to take a big issue. So it's a big issue for us, big issue for anyone else. Okay, can we take one last question maybe? And then if you want to hang around, I've got a bit of time afterwards with you as well.
Strategy or if they feel under pressure that they try and follow up with the increased consumption of alcohol to start to reduce this and that. What's the strategy to recommend in the newspaper?
Well, it's a difficult question. So, first of all, as we said, the communication is vital. If the kids aren't talking, then we've got a problem. We really don't know. And the person they're most likely to talk to, again, statistically, is the parent, but sometimes in your situation, you might be the least likely person that they want to talk to. So they have, even if it's another kid, at least they've got somebody to talk to. But the school doesn't have one particular strategy for this because it's such a wide area, you know, it manifests itself in such different ways. And whether, I mean, we don't have an issue at all with kids doing anything on campus, not that we know of. But it's more, say, I keep mentioning the same thing, but it's around the Ninja area and downtown. It's those two things. Cowsand Road is bad. There are other areas downtown that are bad. There are some little pockets of it around here. But what we try and do with kids is we try and educate about the possible risks. We try, you know, things like this to talk to parents. This, as I said, it's a partnership. We have to work on this together. But all lines of communication are open. If any of you have any issues with this, or you know, any confidential issues you want to share, there are, you know, the people that I've spoken about before. You can add my name to the list as well. We're all willing to help with this as well. But no real, there's no written policy. Ideally, we want to get in a situation where students are advocating for other students and helping other students. It's a fine line because the teenage bond and the whole trust thing is really important for them. You know, they trust each other with their lives at this stage because they feel they need to. So you don't want to see that bond broken, but maybe that's something we can look at actually is good skills for advocating for each other without breaking that trust.
I agree with her because I see they chat with each other about their problems a lot on the computer, but they don't tell it to the parents, but they tell it to each other.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, it's a really good point. Yeah, we'll talk to the high school. Okay, so good question. So what we did, we showed this to about 500 high school students. What we missed were the first season IAS's kids, because, as I said, the only reason we could free up 45 minutes, as I said, I won't do 5 minutes. You know, you can't do 5 minutes and then leave them. It's much more important, and you have to have, as Chris said, up that back channel for the ongoing communication. But we did unfortunately miss those ISS kids, probably 150 kids missed out. But we have all this data and we've got other ways through counsellors that we actually do it with. Yeah, we're always trying to do more, you know. Okay, the last two questions. 1, 2, okay.
Okay. I was just going to say that I think that the main class in the school is somehow low compared to the state, because you did the drug testing. So I think what Kristen said is a very good idea, to the urine test, so that way, the lower of drinking alcohol will increase, because the kids will know that they will get eventually tested. I don't know how much that will cost to the school, but I'm sure the PTA will ask parents who mind, putting some of that money into that, so it will help our kids, we do our part. I mean, like I was saying, part of the job is the most important job to be a parent. I don't know, it's just.
Let me talk to high school admin and just see if it's on their agenda and if we could do some, we can look into it. Okay, good one, thanks. Last one.
My question was, when you introduce when it's middle school, do you introduce the biological
Okay, good question. We probably don't go into this level with middle schoolers. I think, to be honest.
Middle school is not about weighing balloon,
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah.
But that is important.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and maybe that's something we can look at because it's definitely done, I think, in middle more from the moral point of view rather than the science point of view. But I mean, it's not difficult science, is it really? I'm not, as I say, I'm not a scientist. I get this. So maybe it's something we can incorporate for sure. Thank you. Thanks.
Graham, I think I can speak for every parent when I say I'm really glad we did this. Thank you so much. I also want to take a minute to thank Mr. Chris Bell for his time this morning. He clearly got the A-team for this workshop. We traditionally give a gift to our guest speakers. Mr. Scott, I'm pretty sure you have a closet full of shirts with Panthers on it, just missing, and flowers was just weird, so...
Drugs and alcohol are right.
But you can never get too many free lunches, so on behalf of the rest of the Yankees, thank you.